Okay, we're recording. Thanks everyone for joining us today. Let me share my screen here. We are at the March 11th GRAC meeting. Welcome. Everyone should have the audio coming through Zoom. If you need to call in, you're going to be muted. So I'll just keep an eye out here for anybody else that had issues coming in through the panelist. The presentation is going to be recorded. We're going to post this to our website within a week. If there's any attendees that aren't part of the committee, we will have times for questions and answers. You can enter your questions into the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and then during the allotted times, we'll address those. And this is just a little bit about our bylaws and limits for speaking. We can delve into that in more detail if others do join us and want to weigh in tonight.
All right, back to you, Ken.
Okay, let's go ahead and start. Why don't we, I don't know how to go around the table on a Zoom call, but if somebody would wait and introduce themselves and get on the record. This is Ken Foote, I'm chair, and I'm here. Go ahead. I can call off names. How about you, Sandra? Press your space bar, please.
There I am. I'm Sandra Smith, Washington County unincorporated public member.
Sue? Press your space bar.
Boucher, public member.
Thank you. Beth?
Beth Vargas Duncan, industry member.
Vinod?
Vinod Singh, industry member.
Ashvin?
Ashvin Nagaraja, public member.
And Kathy? Kathy's muted. Is she controlled by you? I don't have a picture either. No? Okay, Kathy Christie is on, but not speaking yet. Kathy Folsom?
Hi, Kathy Folsom, Health and Human Services.
And you, Tom?
Tom Eggleston, HHS representative.
Okay, thank you. Now I have to go back to a different screen and look at the agenda again. It's over here. Okay, you're on, Tom. The solid waste and recycling program updates.
All right, thank you, Ken. Everybody, I have a pretty light amount of updates this evening. I've been on parental leave for the last couple of weeks, so I haven't been too plugged in, but I have a couple of updates to share with you all. The first one is in regards to the code changes relating to the Solid Waste Advisory Committee. The Board of Commissioners acted on 3/2, so last Tuesday, to in a third reading, second public hearing, and adopted ordinance 871, which amended the code related to the Solid Waste Advisory Committee to changes that include changing the name of the committee to the Garbage and Recycling Advisory Committee, the GRAC, if we want to use an acronym, or we just call it the committee, whatever we want to call it, but including some language that directs the committee to include equity in its consideration of membership. And that will be talked about a little bit more later with the bylaws as those get worked through. Oh, hey, Kathy. Sorry. Can you guys still see me, or?
We see your
Yes.
Zoom sign in.
Well, that's Kathy Christie, I think.
Oh,
Has taken the reins. Can you put it back? There it is. Okay, sorry. Um,
I hold the power,
There
sorry.
you go. The other provisions related to the board approving bylaws, so that wasn't necessarily written in previously. So the board will be the final approver of bylaws for the committee after the committee provides advice and recommends bylaws. There is term limits for 4-year terms, a limit of 2 terms, so that's 8 years total. There has also been an adjustment in membership to 8 voting public members and 1 voting industry member. So those are the changes that were effective in code. They were voted on March 2nd and they go into effect on April 2nd. So they're technically not in effect yet today. We do have the bylaws, which we'll discuss this evening, kind of tentatively scheduled for a board meeting towards the end of April. So there'll be a little bit of time in transition and flux. So any questions about the code changes and what they mean for the committee?
Apparently not.
Okay. There are a couple terms that are set to expire March 31st, 2021. We have agreed or decided that we would offer and support committee members that want to serve past their terms, if their terms are expiring, until the dust settles and the board appoints new members. That's optional, obviously, for anybody that's terms expiring March 31st, 2021. You can please reach out to Kathy Folsom and myself, and we can talk about how you want to work forward on that. Another announcement related to membership, Mike Lafferty, so our vice chair, did resign from the committee a couple weeks ago. He sent an email to the director of HHS, basically saying that he felt like he had served his purpose and he had really contributed to the committee and felt like he was ready to step aside and let other people serve on the committee. So that's another vacancy. So we'll have 3 vacancies to fill in the next couple months. And staffer is going to start working on some recruitment materials. If you know anybody in the community that is maybe interested in serving, we would appreciate a referral. We'd be happy to chat with anybody and share information about the committee and talk about the opportunities. So that is an option. Hey, Kathy, see you. All right, next update. The last meeting, Oregon DQ came to the committee to talk about their legislative effort to modernize Oregon's recycling. Lots has happened at the legislature since then. There was a hearing a week and a half ago in the Senate Energy and Environment Committee on the proposal. There was a lot of testimony. I think they actually had to carry through a couple separate days to go through all of the public testimony. 3 days, Vinod saying. There's a lot of testimony. The paper packaging industry, and Vinod, you can correct me, sounds like you attended and watched, they pretty much all came out opposed to the proposal, which I guess is not necessarily surprising. There is some opposition from the Oregon Wine Growers Association, and I think there's some concern about how wine packaging and wine bottles would be included in the bill. There's some general concerns from Oregon business and industry, I think, just about the impacts this has on business and that's still reeling from the pandemic. Local governments came out, I think, pretty strongly in support of the Association of Oregon Counties, testified or wrote a letter in support of the League of Oregon Cities and several local governments. So I don't know if, I know Vinod, you're watching this closely, and Beth, you probably are too, if you guys have anything to add about the evolution of the legislative effort.
What is the wine people's objection? We've had the bottle bill for what, 25 or 30 years?
They're not included in the bottle bill. So wine has been exempt from the bottle bill. So I think there is kind of a conversation about, at least from DQ's perspective, they could probably pick if they want to go in the bottle bill, then they're out of this legislation. If they want to go in this legislation, they're probably out of the bottle bill. So they probably don't want to be in either, though, I guess. I'm not sure exactly what their specific opposition is, but
I'm just curious because we've had a long time now to be, and a number of states have bottle bills of one kind or another. And I can't see any signs of a lessening of soda pop sales driven, or the doom and gloom that people said would occur as a result of this just hasn't occurred. And so And it's resulted in an awful lot of bottles and cans not getting out in the woods on trails and stuff. So I think it's done approximately what they hoped it would do, and it hasn't had the negative impact that some people were telling us was going to happen. And I was just wondering if you had some insights on what is it they're proposing to have the wine industry do, and why are they opposed?
Yes, my understanding is, like, Vinod, maybe you could speak to this too.
Well, I think there was a couple of tracks on this, and Beth, you probably know as well, or better. The producers, some of the producers felt like they hadn't been involved in the process. So they said it was not even that we're 100% against it. We weren't involved in crafting this. We watched it, but we weren't invited to it. Some of the paper, some of it was, hey, we already have recycling programs for paper and cardboard. These things aren't issues. That was sort of, I felt like that's what some of them were saying. Maybe they don't need to be part of it. So there's those two pieces. And then if I remember right, the wine, that it was Ponzi, and I can't remember the exact reason, but I think it was, she just didn't feel like they should be responsible for that. And I can't remember the exact reason. Do you remember, Beth, what her?
I think the same thing, that it seemed like they were assimilating this a little bit more recently and were taking it in. I think my sense is that they were concerned about possible constraints on their packaging, that they don't have now. So I know most of us, when we think of wine packaging, we think of glass bottles, but wine does come in other form, types of packaging. And I don't know what they might have been looking at in the future and how this could impact them. I'm totally hypothesizing here, but I do know that committee members took it pretty seriously, that wine industry was not fully on board and was expressing some concern. So I'm certain there's a dialogue going on there now. So.
Yeah, I don't think she was representing Ponzi as much as she was representing the wine makers.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I would agree.
Yeah, so there's ongoing work. I think presumably there'll be a work session on the legislation. There's, I think, some work happening on some additional amendments that we could see in the next couple of weeks.
If the state passes something, if they make a law and pass it, does that require then that the county produce conforming legislation or a conforming ordinance that meets that statute?
I would anticipate if this passed, we would have to change some of our rules in regards to what's recyclable, what's considered mixed recycling, referring to statewide lists. I think there would be some changes we'd have to make. We wouldn't have to do a wholesale rewrite of our code by any means. That's been written to kind of retain the oversight and regulation of the collection system in local government's hands, so it doesn't change our relationship with solid waste collectors or anything along those lines. But there's definitely some pieces of it that would impact our programs and require us to take some new rules in for sure. There's a time frame too. It's, I think, 2025 is when it would start going into effect. So there's some time to work through that as well.
Kathy Folsom.
Yeah, I was just going to, yes, I was just going to say that DEQ anticipates quite a undertaking of doing a large rulemaking if this legislation passes. So I would guess that will happen, and then we'll see if we're diverging in some way, if it touches on our current code or rules.
So far, we've talked about the wine industry and bottles. Was there much about food waste and the developing changes in that area?
There's part of it is composting is included in that. Some truth in the labeling and composting, and then some contamination reductions in composting. So it does touch on it. It's 93 pages of excitement. There's a lot in there, and there's things that we've looked at it a bunch, and we're still looking at it, thinking, what does this mean, and how does this impact going down the road, or what touches what in different ways. So the conversation isn't over by far. They're still going on. And the producers, I'm sure, are weighing in, and the packaging manufacturers are weighing in probably right now too.
Does
All right.
anybody else have any questions or comments?
We'll keep you posted with what we know. Hopefully next month I'll have a better update. I kind of playing catch up and trying to understand what happened over the last couple of weeks. Sounds like a lot's going on, so that's good. My last quick update is just an update on Ridwell. We talked a little bit about this company, Ridwell, at our last advisory committee meeting. I mentioned that Ridwell is a company that's providing I would call it a curbside subscription service for hard to recycle and reuse items. So think plastic film, plastic bags, styrofoam. We did get a question from the committee members about what's the county's position on Ridwell? Are they acceptable to be operating in the county? Are we trying to shut them out of the county? So there's, we have Washington County Code 8.04, which is our code that regulates solid waste collection. And it defines solid waste collection for compensation as being under the authority of the Solid Waste Control Code. So we're right now working with our counsel, our attorney's office, to kind of evaluate what their service they're providing, really get to understand the service they're providing, and then work with the system and them to really understand how that might fit into the regulatory system or might not. So we're really in the investigatory process. We're not making assumptions. We're not trying to close the door on the service. I think it is sounds like a beneficial service. They're diverting materials into reuse and recycling. So that's a positive. And there's a lot of community interest. They have a lot of community members that have signed up, subscribed to their service, and signed up to be on waiting lists for their service to expand. So that clearly tells us there's some interest out there too. So I think we really just need to understand their business, understand how it may or may not fit into solid waste code, and then move forward from there and determining what's the best path forward. If that's finding other providers, working with the current solid waste collectors, working with Ridwell, working with just opening it up. There's different ways to kind of go through it. So we're trying to navigate that right now. We're also working closely with the city of Hillsborough and the city of Beaverton to make sure that we're all on the same page and understanding how this new service might be provided in our communities.
That was
We
going to
wanna
be my
on the same
question
page with
was what are the other jurisdictions doing?
them. Everybody's in the same place as us. We're just kind of in the discovery mode and really trying to understand what they are and how they may or may not fit.
So am I correct in inferring that they are interested in providing a service that our existing haulers either do not provide or are not interested in providing?
The current haulers are currently not providing it. I would say that we have received some interest from current haulers that they might be interested in providing that type of service. So that, enters into this conversation as well, whether or not it is something that the current system or the current providers may be able to do as well.
Okay. I would like to see somebody take away styrofoam and somebody take away film. And I don't really care much who does it. I just don't want to have to drive to Tigard every time I get my car completely full of 5 pounds of styrofoam.
Yeah, and it is a very different service. It's not I would say garbage is essentially an essential service. We need to have garbage service so households can remove solid waste from your property. You could have a code violation if you're not removing solid waste from your property. There's some public health concerns about not removing waste from property. This is definitely a service that is a kind of a above and beyond, a niche service, a boutique service that if someone is interested in paying extra to have, certain recyclables or reusable materials hauled or transported for them. So it's not necessarily a type of service we would expect every customer in the system to have or pay for if they didn't want to, but it's the kind of thing that if somebody is interested in it, they may be able to sign up for it. And I think that is a model that makes sense for this type of collection.
Vinod?
I have a question. I know a little bit about what they do. Does anybody know where the stuff is going? Are they just driving, picking your styrofoam up, driving to Agilex, picking your bags up, driving to Fred Meyer?
So the styrofoam is going to Agilex. The film, plastic, they have they call it a like consolidation point, a warehouse. They're careful not to call it a sorting facility or a MRF. It's more of a place they bring things and consolidate it. And they send their film plastic to Trex. And they do, I think, by semi-load. They also collect batteries. They have a relationship with a battery recycler, I think, back east or in the Midwest. And then they do light bulbs. And I'm not sure exactly what they're working with on light bulbs. The rest of their stuff is reuse. And they kind of rotate the reuse categories. I think textiles is always on the acceptable list, and they take the textiles to Goodwill, or I think some to Goodwill, and they also have a relationship with a Pioneer Rag. I think it's a company that reuses textiles to make rags and other clothing of sorts, or cleanup products. And then they kind of rotate through depending on what it is. They have like, they did Halloween candy after Halloween and brought it to a charity. They do, sometimes they did packaged like to-go silverware and took it to food banks. So they kind of go through these special reuse categories and pick up things along those lines. It's an interesting approach, and it seems very nimble and fluid.
Sandra, go ahead.
So I'm on their email list because our next door neighborhood had a big thing about it. So I get emails. I don't know why you guys are trying to find out what it's all about. They're pretty transparent. They've got a website and everything.
Yeah.
They're already taking memberships in my city and well here in my neighborhood.
So I think it's
A lot
less
of
like,
people are signing up for it.
less trying to understand what they're about. We understand what they're doing, but it's more about how does the code regulate what they do. So the code regulates hauling solid waste for compensation. So there is an argument that is being made that maybe what they're doing is not hauling solid waste. They're hauling something other than solid waste. Or there's also a conversation, there was a ruling in the state of Washington at the Utilities and Transportation Commission saying that they're a common carrier, similar to like a FedEx or an Amazon. So they're just transporting things from A to B, and so they're not haulers. So there's these regulatory nuances about what rules apply to them and what do not. And so I think that's kind of the exploratory process we're in right now. And we're leaning on our attorneys to try to help us understand the code and the rules, because we need to apply it evenly to whoever's in the system, in a sense. If
And
that
how
makes
about
sense.
James Recycling?
Yeah, they're the exact same. We've talked with them as well. They have essentially the exact same service they're providing. So any kind of outcome of the conversation with Ridwell would apply to James Recycling as well. And James Recycling also does special events where they kind of do community collection events. And those are totally really a separate type of thing. And so those are not considered like a curbside collection service.
Are there special events similar to what what's it, DEQ puts on or Metro puts on, where you go to the high school parking lot and give them all your old paint and your leftover pesticide and what have you?
Yeah, except James Recycling is doing like hard recycled plastics, so plastic films and styrofoam and other things that don't get recycled in your recycling cart. And James Recycling works with Denton Plastics, which is a local plastics recycler, and they have a close relationship. So they're collecting plastics that are not necessarily mixed recycling acceptable, and then they take them straight to Denton, and they're sorted out very neatly because of the way they collect them and how they're managing their collection approach.
Okay, anybody else have questions? Okay, what's next? Has anybody turned up for oral communication?
That's it for my updates too.
No, we have no attendees tonight.
Okay, well, let's move on to solid waste advisory. Who gets that? The community bylaws.
I do.
That's what I thought.
Good evening. My name is Kathy Folsom, and I'm here tonight to discuss the proposed committee bylaws. I thought I'd give a short overview presentation first, and then I'll go ahead and share the draft bylaw document, and we can go through each page just to see if there's any comments or questions or proposed changes. As you may remember, and as Tom referred to, this is part of a multitask project. The first cast was to update Washington County Code 8.04 to reflect changes regarding committee membership duties, etc. That task is now complete, and with the board approving proposed changes to both Washington County Code 8.04 and 8.08 regarding the committee effective April 2nd, 2021. The second task was to update the committee bylaws, which need to reflect the board's direction, as well as provide the details related to meeting roles and responsibilities. The proposed bylaws include the following topics. It changes the name, as we've mentioned, to Garbage and Recycling Advisory Committee. It ensures that the recruitment and selection process is open to all and includes equity considerations. It adds a provision that the board does adopt the committee's bylaws. It increases the number of voting public member positions from 6 to 8 and reduces the number of industry member positions from 3 to 1 voting member. It changes the membership terms from 5 years to 4 years and adds term limits to allow for no more than 2 successive terms of membership. It designates an annual meeting for member training and ongoing education. It allows both in-person and online committee meetings. It provides pre-committee meetings with staff as requested, and it adds duties related to the solid waste disposal code. So now I think I'll try and share the document and we'll walk through it. So is it big enough for y'all to see? I mean, good enough?
I can see it.
Yeah.
All right, so the first page basically provides a purpose that's closely aligned to the purpose that's in the code now. And, you know, it intentionally calls out that we're hopeful to produce equitable outcomes from decisions that impact all users of the garbage and recycling system. And then it goes on to really drill down to the main duties that the committee will have responsibility for. Many of them should look familiar. Things like annual rate review, changes to code, changes to rules. But we've added some that are more community-based, such as assessing and reporting on the impact of decisions that affect all users of the garbage and recycling system, including community members, businesses, and other affected groups. And feel free to interrupt me if you have a question or a comment too. It also calls out that this committee does have responsibilities in the solid waste disposal code. So for example, franchise agreements come before this committee when they're up for renewal. And in fact, by this June, Recologies will be up for renewal. So that will come to the committee first before going to the board. Until this point, Chapter 808 was pretty lean as in terms of referencing the committee. So that's changed. And now the bylaws just needed to state that you recognize it's not just hauling solid waste control activities.
Did I see you have a question, Sue?
Yeah, because I can't see.
Yes, Kathy, and this is more of an observation than anything else. But as I was reviewing these, I noticed that 1.2 is an assess and report, and all of the other points are more of a review and advise. Is there something different about this one particular point that we would be assessing and reporting? And it's a question. I mean, I just
Certainly. I don't know that there was anything particularly intentional about that. I think there is some nuance about assessing versus reviewing. Reviewing typically is you actually have a proposal or a document or something that you need to go through and review, and assessing might be a little bit more higher level. like just sort of, you might review admin rules and then you might assess the impact of the admin rules. So I look at it as they're partners.
Yeah, I think another good example, Sue, and this is not something that the committee has necessarily done in the past. Say, for example, we adopt rules related to multifamily recycling programs that that we will be hearing later this year as a result of some metro changes. The committee could ask staff or work with staff to assess the outcomes of the rule changes. So what happened a year later? What happened with those changes? What was the outcome of that? And kind of report out on that. So I think looking at past decisions and really assessing whether the intent was met, kind of following up and following through on decisions is kind of how I read that.
Okay. If there aren't any more questions on sort of the broad duties, I'll move on to membership. Here we're being intentional that we're through our recruitment, we're going to seek to represent the whole community, including those community partners from historically marginalized groups and who have lived experience of racial or ethnic inequity. We wanted to be intentional.
Is that generally specifically related to garbage hauling and solid waste? The marginalized communities.
Generally is how we interpreting that.
Yeah, it's sort of leading with the high level intention, and then as we go through each of the points, it drills down and gives some examples of community groups that we might seek to recruit from. So.
Okay.
So basically there's 10 members, the 8 community members that all vote, the industry member who votes, and then Tom's position, the solid waste and recycling division manager, makes up the committee. And we wanted to provide some examples of some of the groups that might be represented on the committee. This is by no means meant to be an exhaustive list. It's just to give some direction as to some areas that we might seek to recruit from. So it's everything from students to the disabled community, to the aging population, to multifamily. It's pretty broad. We didn't want to be so prescriptive that we would be limited. We're really looking for good candidates. So.
And this is an area I think that we would like to hear some brainstorming. If you think we're could add some or we're missing some categories that might experience the solid waste system differently. We're trying to think about this section a little bit like, you know, somebody that lives in an apartment community experiences the system differently than someone that lives in a single family home, or a business that is in the food sector might experience the solid waste system differently than a community member that lives in a single family home. So we're trying to look at these kinds of different ways community members and the community interacts with the solid waste collection system, and trying to really get a good representative view of that.
Yeah, I was going to ask how you were going to appoint new members. I think we should have someone who's a business owner. I think we should have someone who's from an apartment complex. I don't know if we have that right now. I don't think we're truly representing the whole different type of people. We should also have, I don't know. I mean, there's so many different groups here, but I think we really should have at least one business owner in unincorporated Washington County and a multifamily person.
Okay,
Yeah,
Sandra, I'm in a condo place with 62 units, and as near as I can tell, there's absolutely no difference in how we handle solid waste and everything as an apartment complex. We've got the big dumpsters in a fenced off area, and I think so I would lump together condos and those, any place that has group garbage as that subgroup and see if we have representation.
Like a shared service situation. Yeah. And that's a good question, Sandra. And that's something we've struggled with because we never have asked those questions in the past. So a similar thing we came up with when we were talking about where do folks live, the previous was that you lived in Washington County, and Mike was always like, I lived in Hillsborough, and we didn't know how many actually committee members actually lived in unincorporated. So those, I think, understanding who's serving on the committee right now better in terms of their situation and what, their representation, if they live in like Ken just revealed that he lives in a multifamily arrangement. So there's going to be some work we need to do and try to understand that as well. And then going forward, trying to do some more intentional recruitment, potentially asking questions from applicants about what interests they have. I think the business community is not necessarily we haven't asked to represent the business community. Sue works for the Beaverton School District, but we haven't really asked Sue to represent the Beaverton School District. Sue represents herself. So there's a lot of different ways to think about that. And so we're going to be asking those questions when we're looking for new members and presenting those members to the board and saying, here's the applicants, here's who they are, and here's who they represent, and here's what, and then they can help kind of identify those that they want serving on the committee.
And I would just say that the board, part of when applicants go to the board for appointments, they're asking for a lot more information now. They're very interested in background, interests, demographics. So that actually will help us because we intend to be a bit more, like Tom said, asking questions and trying to get a sense of what the interest might be as well. Part of the reason for putting this section in here was without some identified potential interest groups, then I felt like it would just be status quo of it shows up somehow, people find out, we do some recruitment, but we're not very intentional about trying to reach out to a college and see like their sustainability program, if there's an interest there, or some of the other areas that might have interest, but we just don't know. So that's kind of where we were going here. But, and the other thing I would say too is if you think of anything even after the meeting, like Tom said, we're not going to the board until later in April, please reach out. I am, committee input, since this guides your committee, is really important to me. So, but sometimes it's hard to think, when you're seeing it sort of for the first time. So.
Do we have a business owner on the committee? Or like a small business owner or someone who actually owns a business in unincorporated Washington County?
Ken, you're a small business owner, aren't you?
Well, until when I was still working, I was,
Yeah,
but
okay.
yeah, I my whole life I've been in small companies, and I certainly represent a small company point of view. And I look to Mike a lot for large company, and Mike worked for probably the premier critical waste generator in the county. They use chemicals I've never heard of, and very dangerous ones. And they have a whole department that does nothing. And Tektronix, when they were active, had a very large active waste management kind of group. Because I interacted with them to get rid of some stuff I couldn't figure out what to do with, and DEQ helped me out and twisted Tektronix's arm to take a bunch of vats of nasty chemicals off my hands and get rid of them for me. So we have the resources out there, and there are a lot of people, and I don't know the work background of all the community members on the committee, but most of the community members are not involved in the recycling business at all. They're in some other entity. And as everybody on the committee knows, my background in flying and everything is all in small companies and very closely regulated companies. So I'm used to both halves of that. So, and Mike was really good at researching issues and bringing things to light. So I'm not unhappy with the way the committee has been represented so far, this committee at least. And I think I don't think we have to make a lot of changes.
Yeah, I think what,
Okay.
and Kathy was trying to say this section, the way we see this and understand this, it helps guide us in making recommendations to the board. So if we have 6 or 7 or 8 applications and we're reviewing the applicants and we're trying to understand who's represented on the committee and who's not, we might look to this section. We will look to this section to identify gaps. And these are kinds of things that we have called out as wanting to make sure we can seek representation for. So this helps us kind of build the committee to be holistic and more equitable and kind of include voices that we might not have heard from in the past, in a sense. And I think it means something a little bit different if we're talking to you, Ken, is a good example. You live in a condo community. If we were having the conversation in when you join the committee about what's it like to live in a apartment community, you're thinking maybe a little bit more about advocating for folks living in multifamily settings and thinking more about the service provision in that sense. So I think it gives maybe a member a little more agency to think about their interests. I know, Sandra, you're a master cycler, so you're advocating for and thinking about the master cyclers and how advocating for more waste diversion and education opportunities and programs and things like that. So I think that's our vision of it.
Okay. So a little more detail basically is fleshed out around the committee. The general public members need to work and/or live in Washington County. We would give preference for membership to applicants that are in unincorporated, living or working in unincorporated. We thought about just
before that, as a unincorporated Washington County homeowner and resident, I really think that the membership should be exclusive only to unincorporated Washington County, either property owners, business owners, or people who work and or live in unincorporated Washington County. I don't understand why regular Washington County people would even want to be on this committee. And I mean, everything that we work for affects only unincorporated Washington County. So I'd rather we represent ourselves and not have somebody from outside unincorporated. But
so a couple
I don't know what
thoughts
everybody is
around-
right now. I mean, I'm sure I like Ken lives in Hillsborough, but I mean, but in the future, I would like everyone to be unincorporated.
Yeah.
And one
A couple of thoughts on that. One, it hasn't always been all that easy to get a lot of applicants for this committee.
Get 200,000 people.
I
right?
know, but
If we market it right, we'll get the people.
so and we are gonna, increase our recruiting efforts, and we hope. But the other thing is, part of the role of this committee is going to have some education and outreach review, and that typically affects the whole county. So we've added some roles around reviewing and reviewing and advising on waste reduction and recycling education programs and campaigns. They're almost always the whole county except Beaverton, because they're not part of our cooperative. So granted, on the regulatory side, it's true, it's only unincorporated, but in terms of some of the programs and programmatic changes, it would be the whole county.
I'd be curious to hear from others too. I mean, if the committee feels strongly that we can propose that to the board too and see what they think. But
I mean, the city of Beaverton has their advisory committees, and I went to try to apply for one for our, it was some kind of road or something. And they said, no, you have to, even though my address is Beaverton, I am not in the city of Beaverton. They said you cannot apply. So I think, why not us be the same way? I mean, most of this does affect just us, though, unincorporated.
I've outlived out here for a long, long time. And in my impression, I like the inclusiveness. I initially did not understand. I was in unincorporated Washington County until my recent move into a condo, but most of my life I was in a single family house in the Reedville area between Beaverton and Hillsborough in unincorporated Washington County. And I wasn't sure I understood the distinction. My observation of local governments in the Washington County area is that the city of Beaverton is the example you hold up to how not to do it. They are, in my opinion, hell-bent on demonstrating why independent service districts and everything else work better than having a city government. They do a terrible job. And your comment about unincorporated, anybody who works for Nike works in unincorporated Washington County because Beaverton shot themselves in the foot on that. And I don't think using Beaverton, even though you're in the Beaverton mailing area, I don't think using Beaverton as a shining example of anything is a good idea.
I'm very thankful that Nike is there, because I live right next to Nike and we don't have to be in the city of Beaverton.
Well, one thing I might propose is we could always go ahead and make it an unincorporated Washington County and try it out. I mean, it would mean we'd have to go back to the board to adjust the bylaws if it didn't work, but that might be something. Well, how about we take it under consideration and we'll do a little internal research and see like how it's worked for other boards and commissions and committees. And if they think it's a good idea and that we can expand our recruitment, then we could always try it.
I also
Anybody
want to
else?
comment that I have been here long enough that I far exceed any of the proposed requirements for membership. And as soon as I want to see how the current trying to fill the 3 seats go, and if you're overwhelmed with people, then I will retire and we can bring in additional people. But we're also in danger of losing institutional history as we get rid of all the people who've been here some years. So we want to be careful about how quickly we leap off the bridge.
Yeah, anybody else have any thoughts on the unincorporated versus incorporated thing? The way it's written is, preference for, so if we had, we would give preference to the unincorporated community members. I guess if you get into a situation where someone is representing one of the preferred groups and they are in the city, and then someone is not representing one of those groups and is unincorporated, it's kind of a competing interest, but I'm curious what others think.
Okay. The rest of this section just spells out the makeup of the committee that we've talked about a couple of times. So I'm going to move on. The membership term is 4 years, 2 successive terms. Right now, we are investigating like when, how this will work with the current committee membership. It may be that members that are getting close to their renewal date, that might be where the clock starts. I'm not exactly sure yet, but I will, we can report back on that. It could be that you still have a number, if the clock starts, you would have 8 years. If it takes into account time already served, then you wouldn't. And that's going to take
my understanding, Kathy, from talking with Brad Anderson, our counsel, it's kind of when the code changes, it changes in a point in time. It doesn't look backwards necessarily. So Ken, like you're saying, if you've already done 8 years, it doesn't technically legally matter. Your 8-year term clock would start when the code changes. So technically you'd be eligible for 2 terms right now. That's how the legal interpretation of it would be.
Thank you.
So beyond that, it's talks about how you resign. Mike did it this way. He submitted his resignation in writing. If someone, can't serve, the board will appoint a person to serve the remaining unexpired term. So some of this is from the prior committee bylaws, so that I didn't change. One of the things that I added is a requirement that at least once every 2 years, we have elections to vote a chair and a vice chair. In particular now, since Mike as the vice chair has resigned, my expectation will probably be later this year, we'll hold elections. I think that gives some opportunity for others. I really, really appreciate that Ken has taken this on for a really long time, and you might get reelected, but I think if we put some intentionality around holding elections, that just, keeps opportunity alive for others that might be interested as well. And then we'd like 2-year terms for the officers and renewed for a total of 2 terms. This could change. I mean, if you guys have input and you think that's not a good timing, love to hear it. Okay. Moving on to meetings. Once we recruit for our new members and get things kind of reset, I intend to start circulating a calendar, and we'll fill in as much as we know. I find it helpful when I've been on many committees, and it's always good for me to see sort of like the target dates for some of the big topics that might be addressed by the committee for at least the next year or 2 years. So I wanted to add that. We're trying really hard to keep to our monthly schedule for committee meetings. We think that for now, remote online committee meetings have been working really well and seems to promote attendance, and I find them really convenient. So that's likely to continue. I don't know once things get back to that normal word, whether we'll have an in-person meeting at least periodically. I basically wanted to just hold the option out there that it could be either. But for now, we're going to continue with the online platform. I wanted to capture something that Tom and I already have done for the chair and the vice chair, but we want to make it open to any committee public member, that if you want to have a pre-meeting and talk about scheduled topics, we would be more than happy to set that up. And
It's like Vinod has a question, Kathy.
Why?
Yeah, I can't see.
Sorry, I screw your screen sharing.
Yeah, sorry.
Just curious, why would it only be public? Why wouldn't the industry member be able to meet with you if there's a topic of particular concern?
I think we could make it committee members.
Yeah, we could. I think
Yeah,
at the
just strike-
time,
Strike public.
I thought,
Yeah, I think we can do
yeah,
that.
I definitely could do that. To be honest, Vinod, I think there was a thought that the industry member already was well versed, but that's not the intent of the pre-meeting. It's really to provide context, detail, whatever the questions are. So yeah,
I think
I'll
that's,
just-
I think, as you say, I think that's going to be a result of you eliminating 2 industry members that we don't all have the same knowledge.
yeah, I will definitely make that change. That's good. Good comment.
And I want to say that this particular staff has always been very willing to talk about any issue. Whenever I read something in the Oregonian or heard something on the radio, I could call and ask, what does this mean? How does this impact? How does this impact us? And I know Mike frequently did as well. And so it's not because of our exalted position. I found that the staff was always willing to talk to anybody on the committee if you had a question. So I agree with taking the word out, but I think that practically speaking, with this particular staff, it'll have no real impact.
Okay. A lot of the rest of this section is procedural. We post staff reports and agendas a week in advance. We do provide public notice. A simple majority is a quorum. It'll continue to be 5 because we're still going to be at 9 total voting members. I did get rid of a lot of the parliamentarian type language that was in the prior bylaws. I wanted to recognize that with the changes in the industry membership and with having more members, it may be that there would be a need for a longer comment period, for example. If someone wanted to do a presentation or just wanted to make it a little bit less formal to allow for sort of participation from either the industry and or the public. So we still reference open meeting laws, but it doesn't have as much prescriptive nature to the procedures.
And as long as I've been on the board, it's been very informal and been very open. We've not had any instances where we were having to adhere to Robert's Rules of Order or anything like that. And I at least have always been willing to entertain comments from the floor, even if they haven't put their name on the list or anything. If somebody has a comment, it doesn't seem to upset the flow. And I think it's a better way to run the meetings, and having it in the bylaws helps, but I don't think it'll make much change.
Yeah, we've
Okay.
removed references to Robert's Rules of Orders, and they were pretty heavily referenced in the previous version of the bylaws, just to kind of make it more less intimidating, more casual, more trauma informed in a sense.
It still allows for the chair to control the meeting and there is some need to keep the meeting on track. So it's kind of the balance. The next few sections are interactions. This group is really good at doing these sorts of things, such as staying on task, participating. The chair recognizes public attendees. I think that's important. We still have a section in our agenda that is for public comment period. That hasn't gone away, but it's just sort of don't talk over each other, all the basic kinds of things. One thing that's in here that's sort of slightly different is that agenda items are identified and placed on the agenda by the chair and the solid waste and recycling division manager in advance of the meeting. The way I look at this is if members of the committee wanted to go to the chair or the chair wanted on their own to suggest an agenda item, they could. They just have to let staff know prior to that 1 week before the meeting so that it can be posted and public notice could be given. So we're looking for the committee, if you all have something of interest, to reach out to staff and we'll see if we can accommodate it. All right. So the internal committee communication is basically the listen, emphasize, open communication, thoughtful disagreement. I hope there's nothing in here that everyone couldn't agree to. So unless there's a question there, I'll move on. And then we have the relationship of the committee to the board and to staff. It just recognizes that members are appointed by the board, that the committee and the Solid Waste and Recycling Division develop the bylaws, but the board reviews, revises, and adopts. And then it goes on to, in sort of a little shorter sense, hit the big items of advising and assessing and reporting. In terms of staff, the committee works in cooperation with the Solid Waste and Recycling Division staff. And the committee is not involved in the Department of Health and Human Services or Solid Waste and Recycling Division administration or operations. So that it just that you're not weighing in on
Don't approve our
something.
budget.
Yeah. HHS is considering, or Solid Waste and Recycling is considering, that is separate. Those items that would fall under the purview of the committee. And then amendments can be proposed to the bylaws. It just takes a majority vote. And they still would have to be approved by the board, but if the committee wants, as time goes on, wants to change something in the bylaws, can always propose an amendment and then review it and vote on it. And we would weigh in and send it on to the board. So with that, that's all I have. If you don't need me to share the screen anymore, I will stop doing that. Okay. All right, I can see you all again. Thank you. So the next steps are, we intend to bring the committee bylaws to a future board meeting, as Tom said, likely toward the end of April. So with that, staff recommends that the Solid Waste Advisory Committee favorably recommend to the Washington County Board of Commissioners that the proposed committee bylaws be adopted.
And we can.
Okay, I'll move that we do that.
I was gonna say, we can work on including, I know there's one specific change that Vinod
Oh yeah, we can.
highlighted. We can try to include that in some type of a motion if that's the only specific change the committee's interested in.
So I could reread the amendment and try and, the recommendation and try and include that amendment if that's acceptable. Okay. So staff recommends.
Kathy, wait, I think Sue's got something.
Question.
Okay,
Make
sure.
sure Sandra's comments about, the committee members, that you guys are going to reach out to the board or whomever you need to about that issue, because I think she had a valid point and you said you were going to ask somebody about it. And I don't know how that happens. Am I
Yeah. No, I think we can look into it and we can research it. If the committee moves to go forward with them as they are today, that's how we would present them to the board. We could, if the majority of the committee wants to include something different along those lines, that could be a discussion right now as well. I think what Kathy was saying is we can always go back later and make adjustments to the rules one way or the other. So if we do more research and look into it further and try to understand it differently, we can bring that back later as well.
I was hopeful that with the caveat that it says that we give preference, that for now we could move these bylaws on, but with the commitment that we will look into it and report back, and then we could amend if needed. If the committee would like something different, then you guys could have your discussion and then we'll come back to a recommendation again.
Sandra, how do you feel about that?
I'm sticking with it. I would like to have them be future members be unincorporated, either work, well, I don't know about working, but either live or own property in unincorporated Washington County, or a business, run a business in unincorporated Washington County. I mean, you can live in Beaverton, the city of Beaverton, but if you own a house in unincorporated, I mean, your vested interest is the garbage and recycling as well.
So if I can just jump in for a second, I think that's a perfectly rational basis that Sue is taking on that, but just as an example that may be unusual, and this is not a position of those that I represent, but just sharing the factual situation. So I neither live or own property in Washington County. I'm employed by the association and have a unique position that way with the garbage haulers. And so as far as the industry member is concerned, I know that we currently are able to meet that criteria, but just maybe keep that in mind that while there may be industry members operating here, a representative may not actually be the person living or owning property within unincorporated Washington County.
I think a service member that could be an
And
exception.
the current bylaws do separate those, Beth. So public, all members of the representing the general public shall work and or live in Washington County. Preference will be given to unincorporated. It's how it's written now. Then it says there is one voting representative of the solid waste and recycling collection industry with not less than 5 years of experience. The member of the representing industry shall be actively engaged in providing services in or to unincorporated Washington County. That's how it's written. I think that's how it's currently written too. And there was a question about Dave White when he started on the committee, and the finding was that he's got 5 years experience working on behalf of the haulers in unincorporated Washington County. So.
And that bylaw I didn't change. It's
Right.
Other than to reference 1 instead of 3, but the rest of it is the same language.
I think that it's difficult. No, we could be in a very difficult position to get too specific about this because we have in the past. And I think maybe if we take, no, I'm personally, I'm fine with the preference. I'm glad that we are first saying live, work, own, and that preference is going to be given to those individuals. I think that's might be as far as we can possibly go at this stage. And Ken, I think, Ken, you were talking about 3 positions that are vacant. Seeing how we are able to fill those might be a good indicator if we need that broader range. So.
Yeah, I agree that because when I joined the committee, they were short public members. So the committee was, I don't remember how many we were short, but having a full roster of public members has only been the last few years. It's up until then, we were always looking for somebody to join on the public side. It just seemed nobody in the public had much interest in garbage recycling or the whole rest of it. Go ahead, Vinod.
I just have a quick question. I may have missed this. So we have 3 people, Mike left, but we have 2 other positions that are expiring. But didn't you say that when the bylaws change, it basically resets that?
Yeah, well, those 2 positions are industry positions that will become public positions. So that.
Oh, sorry, I forgot.
That's the difference. Yeah.
So I have a question. Let's say hypothetically, I assume Vinod also lives in Washington County somewhere. Could we just convert his role from business industry representative to just another private public? He's a member of the public as well, and he brings with him a wealth of experience that is very valuable to us. And so, could we just have our cake and eat it too?
He could absolutely step down from an industry member position and apply for a public member position, but the board would have to appoint him to that position. So that's not something the committee can do or shuffle or staff. But I mean, it's feasible. He's a he's a resident of unincorporated Washington County, and so he's more than he's more than qualified to be a public member on the committee. Let's put it that way.
And can you reach out to Jeff Murray and see if he's willing to come back on as a
Does
public
Jeff live in
member?
unincorporated Washington County? I don't know if he does. He used to, right?
Don't know either.
I don't think he does anymore. If he did.
So
So I don't know how we want to handle it. I mean, it could, if everyone, we could, Sandra, you could take a motion and vote on it if we want to go there, or if we want to just table it.
I mean, we have 260,000 residents. I mean, if we had like 5,000, I could see that being an issue, but I think if we advertise it and put it in the right places, you might get a lot of people. I mean, when I ran, or when I applied, there were 2 other people for one position, and luckily I got it. But and at the time I applied, I had no idea it was only unincorporated Washington County. I thought it was for the entire Washington County. It wasn't until like a year into it, I was like, wait a minute, what? And then I said, well, wait a minute, am I one of 2 unincorporated people in this whole committee? What's going on here? And it's kind of hard.
I think at this point, it's up to the committee to, have further discussion or vote.
We don't have to
I
bring it
did rewrite.
to the board till the end of April, right? So maybe we can think about it and bring it up at our next meeting in April.
Yeah, I think we will be cutting maybe too close on our board document submittal timelines, which are pretty.
Takes 3
insane
weeks.
to get it on the board agenda and docket in time for a vote next meeting. Let's put it that way. Yeah, in April. It'd be cutting it too close to the SWAC and the board meeting.
Well, I would recommend, I mean, I moved that we accept the staff report recommendation, but I would also recommend that we not incorporate other language that's exclusionary for people who are not in the area. We can always change it, and we don't know what the response is going to be. And historically, the response has not been overwhelming. Your response was really an anomaly that surprised us at the time. And so maybe out of the 260,000, there are 3 more people who would be interested in joining us, but I don't have a lot of high hopes.
I agree with you, Ken. I think we should. I agree with Sandra in principle, but I think it's something that should be looked at in the future.
Anyway, we have a motion. If somebody would second it, then we can go ahead and vote, or we can move to table if somebody wants to do that.
Can we clarify that your motion includes removing the word public? Or Kathy can read it more clearly. How
I
about
could
that?
reread the staff motion, but are you voting on Sandra's addition? Or it's really up to you if you want to take that separately and then vote on the motion for the committee bylaws as amended by Vinod, or either way. I'll just read it for you and then you can decide. How's that? So staff recommends that the Solid Waste Advisory Committee favorably recommend to the Washington County Board of Commissioners that the proposed committee bylaws as amended to allow all committee members access to pre-committee meetings as indicated in section 5.7 be adopted.
And that's what I had in mind. So Beth, if you want to make a move for an amendment or something, that would be the time. Except we don't have a second for my for my motion either, so we really have nothing on the table yet.
So I will second that we adopt the bylaws as presented.
Thank you. So Sandra, do you want to change the wording, or do you want to have a separate motion we can vote on whether we want to put in language that limits it to only Washington County resident, unincorporated Washington County residents, people who live, work, or own property in Washington, in unincorporated Washington County, I believe was the way you put it.
I was kind of wondering if we could get an opinion from the board. Are they having a meeting later this month? I don't know. If we threw it out there, maybe they would say, yeah, it should be that way. I don't know. I mean, if you just present it as it is, they're gonna say, well, sure, they may not even notice or care. But and other committees like that we have, there's other committees, are they in unincorporated Washington County as well? And do they have similar guidelines? That's something I could look at too.
Yeah, most of the committees in the county are open to Washington County residents. I would say we're somewhat unique in that most of our regulatory decision-making is really limited to unincorporated Washington County. If you think about the budget committee or the roads committee or the planning committee,
Housing.
Housing, it has more impact and influence in the cities. In terms of asking the board what their opinion is, it's challenging. I mean, it's a pretty small question for us to go to like a work session and ask them on, and I think they would ask us what the Solid Waste Advisory Committee thinks or what the recommendation from this committee is. So it kind of goes with that chicken and egg thing.
It's just certain things in unincorporated Washington County that we don't have, like food scrap recycling and other things that I'm pushing for that others in other cities already have and they don't care about. And our rates too. I feel weird that people from out of the area would be voting on our rates and laws and things like that. I don't know, but if others like Sue and Ashvin don't see a problem with it, I guess, I don't know, because they're in there too.
Can we do you want to vote on it and just see what the?
Okay, we'll go ahead and call the question then.
So could you read, I'm sorry, could you read this one more time? Because I wanted to clarify if the motion as it stands, did we include Vinod's?
Yes.
Okay, I'm just verifying that.
Mhm.
Okay, thank
And
you.
it's an amendment to section 5.7 to allow
it.
all committee members.
Yeah. Okay, just verifying. It's getting late.
Okay, so it's a binary vote. So I will start with all those in favor, or I will assume everybody's in favor and say everybody who's opposed. Let's do it that way. I'll assume everybody's in favor. And is there anybody who would vote no if when I got to all those opposed say so? Nobody's going to vote at all. Oh, yeah, I'm talking. So
Why don't we do the call out? Just can maybe say whoever's in favor say aye, and then
okay,
not
all
in
those
favor
in
say-
favor say aye.
Aye.
Bye.
Ashwin?
Did I?
I think I'm
Okay.
having internet issues. but
And
unless
Sandra?
you could see.
I think I'll just vote hold my ground, but it doesn't matter anyway, because
No. Okay, and opposed?
that's fine.
That's Sandra. Okay,
Maybe it'll be something that is a null issue anyway. We'll see.
so Tom, if you are asked by the board, how did the committee, you can report that the committee was not unanimous and
Exactly.
the raised this issue. And
Exactly.
if it
Yeah.
hits us, strikes a nerve for them, then they can either come back with instructions to us or they can change it.
And that's what I was just going to say, Ken. And not every vote needs to be unanimous. I think we've talked about this a little bit in the past. I know Sue, you had some concerns about the food scraps and you ended up voting for it, but I want you all to feel like you can not vote with everybody. And Sandra, I think the result of having a 5-1 vote is the question of what did the one person not vote for it? And then that raises the question to the board that we can say, this is why, this is what they were advocating for it. So that kind of brings that topic forward. So I I appreciate that, and I think that's a good result, good outcome.
Your voice will be heard.
And yeah, and I would just add, since I'm often the one who's doing a lot of presentations to the group, that in no way is this personal to me. It's, I bring forward something and then I want the input and I want the committee to decide on their own. I think in the past, maybe there was a little bit more staff heavy, but we're trying to move to a more committee centric decision-making process. So in no way should you consider that this is like going against my recommendation. I just have to put a recommendation in there in order to start the conversation. So thank you.
Yeah, I think in the beginning, when you guys first rolled this out, it said Washington County member. And so you did hear my voice begin to put preference to unincorporated, and I appreciate that. So we'll see what the board says.
Okay, the next thing on the agenda is solid waste and recycling administrative rules. Is that different than what we just did?
It is, but it's just more of bringing the committee up to date. I can do it in couple minutes.
Okay, go ahead.
Just a quick shout out that since I brought the proposed revisions to the admin rules to the committee at the last meeting, we've had a first of what now looks like 3 meetings with the Washington County Hauler Association, and they've provided input on some of the sections. We are by no means done yet. Our intent eventually is to come back to this committee with a proposal for the board. But in the meantime, I just wanted to see if anyone's had a chance to read them and maybe had a glaring issue or a comment that you wanted to make, and also to reiterate that you can call me, send me questions. You don't even have to read the rule if you're just interested in something and you want to know whether we cover that or something you think should, that from a customer, which could be multifamily, community, or business, or from a role that the hauling community has, or staff. So it's sort of, our rules cover all three positions. And so this is a good opportunity to think about the effect that the rules might have from your own perspective, in terms of, like, they changed it doesn't allow me to do this anymore, or it might have this effect. So that's really all I have. I just didn't want us to lose sight that they're sitting out there. If there's interest, I can send you the draft rules directly, like in a Word document. I could do that. It's a lot easier to read than what's posted out there on the webpage. Just let me know. So.
Kathy, I would like to.
I'll just send them out to the group. How's that? After
That'd be great.
when I send the recording message in a couple days, I'll include a little dialogue around the rules and send them to y'all.
Thank you. Okay. And has anybody asked for any, we have a second oral communication for 5 minutes if somebody wants to talk. Does anybody, do we have anybody on that's not part of the committee?
We do not.
Okay, then I think we're done. Thank you everyone for attending, and we'll see you next month.
Thank you. Thanks, Ken.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Have a good evening.
Yep.
Bye.
See you later.
Have a good one.
Thanks for attending the March 11th meeting. Just as a reminder, this has been recorded. It will be posted to the Solid Waste and Recycling website within 7 days. Thank you and have a good evening.